G'day guys, welcome back to True Footy and the final edition of Just the Tips for season 2025, or at least the home and away season. Of course, we will be continuing this series through finals. I'm not sure if I'll do one for week one. I'm going to do a full video where I do my finals predictions, which might make, Just the Tips next week obsolete. But here we go for the final time. It's amazing how quickly the season's gone. It feels like just yesterday I set up in Perth to do one of my first videos of the year, Just the Tips round one, and here we are. It's all coming to an end, and tell you what, my own personal tipping performance this year has seen a decline that would rival the West Coast Eagles Football Club. I tell you what, I got 5 out of 9 this week. The 4 I got wrong were I tipped Sydney very bravely against the Cats, which looked good in the first quarter, and not so great after that. I tipped the Gold Coast Suns, who disappointed me to lose to the Giants this week. I tipped Port. I thought that Port were not as bad as Carlton, and evidently I was very wrong about that. I also tipped Fremantle to beat the Brisbane Lions on Friday night, and I was wrong by 57 points. So just a really horrific round of tipping for me. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about you guys. How did everyone go in our various competitions? Well, we have the tipping winner this week is Cronies Beasts with 9 correct tips and a margin of 14. Well done. Liam Mitchell is now the tipping leader. We've had a few different people bob up and be ranked first throughout this, particularly the last few weeks, it feels like, or at least a little bit of variance there. 153 correct tips this year. That's outstanding. We have a tie for first place in the fantasy competition between Thomas and Jaden. Jaden has been leading all year. Thomas picked him a couple of weeks ago. Then Jaden took back over, and now Thomas and Jaden are tied up with an average score of 21.04. That's outstanding. So we've got a big final round of the season, as it usually is, but this one has had some drama over the last few weeks as to all the different permutations. We got 1 rounds ago, or 1 and a bit, with Gold Coast and Essendon also playing, which I will include in this tipping video as well. So Essendon versus Carlton. This does not have ramifications on the finals race by any stretch of the imagination. I suppose it's still a rivalry game between two big clubs. And I suppose the context is Essendon have actually done a really good job of staying competitive over the last few weeks with their injuries. That was arguably their most competitive performance on the weekend, to go down by 2 points to St Kilda. A really good effort and a really strong, or solid at least, patch of form that I think those players that are playing at the moment can be proud of. So we're well past the point of expecting Essendon to just get belted every game. I sort of had that lurking feeling, and they've proven me wrong most weeks. Not every week, but most weeks with this injured list. Now, Carlton, they're obviously much improved against Port Adelaide. It really doesn't count for much, with all due respect. I'm sure their fans even accept that, but I suppose it would have been encouraging for them to see them click back into gear, and a couple of young guys as well, playing well. Cooper Lord, Matt Carroll as well. These are nice little signs for the future, and it's always nice to have a win, but ultimately, we're into this part of the season where there's a lot of meaningless games. And in this meaningless game, I'm going to tip Carlton to win. I think that's fair, but I certainly think Essendon could challenge them. It's just hard to imagine them coming over the top and actually winning. So, sorry, Essendon fans. I wish you all the... Fuck. I can see you being competitive, but I will tip Carlton. Let's go 20 points, or 20 points. Collingwood versus Melbourne at the MCG. This is an interesting one. Collingwood's obviously their last 6 games, they've lost 5 of them. Which is a horrific state of affairs, really. But I suppose, to be fair to them, I thought they were, clearly much improved against Adelaide. That was, a big step up from their previous week against Hawthorn. I think that was the previous loss they had, where they just looked really slow. And this game, admittedly, it wasn't the game for that kind of pace, and their skills couldn't be shown up because of the weather. But they were very competitive, got the ball inside 50 a lot, and it was one of those games where they were just unlucky to be behind when the siren went. So from that point of view, I know they're still missing a few key players, but my estimation of Collingwood's chances, throughout the rest of the season actually went up a little bit. I don't think they're cooked. It does hurt that they lost those 4 points, but they can still finish as high as 3rd, I believe. So, plenty to play for, and in improved form. Meanwhile, the Melbourne Footy Club sort of labouring a little bit, had a recent win against West Coast, and then, to be fair, a pretty good performance against the Bulldogs, and then were touched up by a much stronger side in Hawthorn. So this one is a tricky one, because these two sides, the head-to-head, I feel like Melbourne is a bit of a tricky team for Collingwood to play, at least in their recent history. So we could see a bit of an upset. It would. I think you'd then have to admit Collingwood's season is cooked if they lose this game. But I'm going to tip the Pies nonetheless. I don't really expect it to be a blowout, because these games are usually quite gritty, but I will say Collingwood win by 21 points and give them some hope for top 4. Port Adelaide and the Gold Coast Suns. This does have its own impact on the finals race. Not for Port Adelaide, whose season is shot and were quite poor against Carlton on the weekend. There's probably enough said about that because, it was a really disappointing performance. As someone who tipped them, I was very disappointed. But for the Gold Coast Suns, the impact of this game is if they lose this, we actually won't know if Fremantle will have missed the finals if they then lose to the Bulldogs the following day, because Gold Coast can actually still miss the top 8 if they lose this game and then lose against Essendon. Should Gold Coast win this game? Absolutely not. Is there a chance? I think there is a chance purely because, well, actually, I didn't look this up, but I feel like Gold Coast's recent form in Adelaide has not been strong. Maybe I'm just going off their terrible performance against Adelaide earlier in the year. That this is Port Adelaide who are limping towards the finish line in this particular season. And I was disappointed with Gold Coast last week, but I also thought GWS played a very good brand of footy in that game. So I think this is a banana skin game, but I'm still going to tip the Gold Coast Suns. They should win this. And if they don't, they certainly can't make the top 4. So the top 4 is still live for them if they win. Let's say 26 points to the Suns. North Melbourne versus the Adelaide Crows. I don't know why, but I feel like this could be an upset here. It's more just vibe than actual logic. So Adelaide, obviously too good for Collingwood slightly. It was a very tight game. Their defence really held up, and it just, caps off a really strong run of form in the second half of the season in particular, where they sewed up the minor premiership last week. So maybe that's a factor as well. There's no real need to, win by a lot in this game, which could be a little variable here for North Melbourne. That being said, obviously from a talent point of view, Adelaide should have them covered regardless of what happens with Isaac Rankin, of course. North Melbourne won on the weekend against Richmond, far too good. Harry Shearer went nuts, 54 disposals, I'm sure everyone's seen that, and a good morale-boosting win that has taken them out of the bottom 2. At any other point this season, would I have thought that North Melbourne were a chance in this game? Probably not. But I do wonder if, Adelaide has just started to, falter a little bit. A couple of close games. There shouldn't have been a close game against West Coast, and there was. And they were caught napping a little bit and came over the top and won. Then another grueling win over the Collingwood Footy Club, and now they don't need to win to secure the minor premiership. This actually has no impact on the finals race whatsoever. I'm going to tip Adelaide. I'm not that brave. Come on, guys. But I have a feeling this could be a bit of an upset. So I'm going to say it's upset of the round, but I'm not tipping it. Richmond versus Geelong. Richmond were the other team involved in that North Melbourne game that I just referred to. Again, a young team that has a lot of good senior players or quality senior players that are playing a role, but nonetheless, they are still young. There's a lot of players under 50 games in that team, and they're showing signs, and I think Richmond over the course of this season can be pretty happy with the way it's gone. It is probably a little bit deflating to play Geelong in the final round. My club was in this situation 12 months ago, and it didn't end well. That being said, Richmond have been a lot more competitive than was expected. And what are Geelong playing for? I mean, top 2, is that really in doubt as I'm looking at this? Okay, I think it actually is, if I'm not mistaken, because Brisbane haven't played yet either. And okay, they do need to win to secure top 2, but percentage is not an issue here. I'm probably talking up this game far too much already. I think we know how this is going to go at the MCG. Geelong should win this comfortably. I'd be very shocked if there was an upset. I'll say 45 points. I don't think there's too much doubt Geelong win this and finish in the top 2. Again, another game that has absolutely no impact on either club's season or the finals race or whatsoever. But West Coast versus Sydney at Optus Stadium, which I could be wrong. I think this is only the 3rd time these two sides have played at Optus, which is funny because this was the first ever game at Optus. Ironic. Look, West Coast last week were pulverised really by the Western Bulldogs, who I thought were quite clinical in that game. And West Coast is an increasingly young team that is, other than a good game against Adelaide, they've really battled through the back half of this season. By contrast, I think Sydney are better than their ladder position currently suggests, albeit they did lose to the Cats, who were a very good side. And they lost heavily as well. But over the stretch, since Goulden's come back into the team, I think they're 6-3. So I can't imagine too much doubt around the result of this game. It's just about margin, and I would delve into that deeper, but who cares? Sydney's going to win this game. Let's say Oh, it'll probably be like 50 points. I'm hoping it's closer, but it probably won't be. GWS versus St Kilda to finish St Kilda's season. GWS obviously still, I think they don't need to win this game to play finals, but probably prefer to win it because I'd imagine that a home final is still absolutely up for grabs. For a team that has been very Jekyll and Hyde this season, their best has been outstanding. Their worst has been very, very poor, actually, in my opinion. We saw a better version of them against the Suns, and outside of that big loss to the Bulldogs a couple of weeks ago, which was horrendous, they have put together a pretty good block of form there. And there's not too much doubt that they'll show up to this game, I would have thought. You'd hope, anyway. St Kilda, I haven't looked this up, but I feel like St Kilda also play well against the Giants. Like these games are a little bit closer than what you'd expect based on ladder position. And the Saints have won, is it 3 or 4 in a row? Albeit against not great sides. It would take a lot, I think, for the Saints to win this game and not ruin the Giants' season, but it would be a massive blow. They'll be buoyed by the re-signing of Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller. I don't know if it'll be enough. I'm not going to tip it anyway. Let's say the Giants win by 15 points over a plucky St Kilda. The Western Bulldogs versus Fremantle is our featured game on the True Footy Live show, aka Footy from the Flat, this weekend. This is the game that will decide who plays in the top 8. There's no other outcome here for Fremantle unless Gold Coast lose to Essendon, which is still possible. But Fremantle need to win, and if they win, they're in, and the Bulldogs are out, and vice versa. So this is just like the wildcard weekend that gets talked about most years recently. The winner goes through, so it's basically the finals even. This is, it's tough. I think if this was like around 14 of the middle of the year and there weren't so many obvious stakes at play here, I would have tipped the Dogs. And I think that they play Fremantle well at Marvel, and I don't think Fremantle's form at Marvel is good. And they've had one game there this year, if I'm not mistaken, and it went really badly. So from the form point of view and the fact that the Dogs looked good against West Coast, I know that sounds a bit silly, but I would say that they just looked in touch, as opposed to Adelaide, who played against West Coast the week before. So that probably doesn't bode well for Fremantle. And Fremantle were very disappointing against the Brisbane Lions at Optus Stadium, capping off a run of 12 games where they won 11 out of them and had to win so many of them in close encounters from behind. Gross. Now, even though I did tip Fremantle in last week's Just the Tips, I remember saying recently on the show that I wondered if that run of form for Fremantle there would just leave them sitting ducks at some point for an opponent to give them a walloping, and that is actually what happened with the Brisbane Lions, even though I didn't tip it, so I can't really claim it, but it could have two impacts. It could derail them a little bit and make them in their heads about bottling another season. Obviously, last year, lost to the last 4 to miss out on finals, and with 2 games left, they needed to win one of them. They've lost one already. Are they in their own heads? Conversely, will it sort of reignite some motivation, I suppose, to try and win because they've had this slump out of the way? I don't know. I think with so much on the line, we can expect the best from both teams, and I'm a little bit iffy about who to tip here. I am going to say the Bulldogs. I think that is who will win, but I'm not writing Fremantle off. I'm going to say this is a 10-point win to the Western Bulldogs, and they make the finals. This will be the final game of the weekend, but not the round, I believe, with Gold Coast and Essendon taking place on Wednesday, so we'll get to that. But the Brisbane Lions versus the Hawthorn Footy Club at the Gabba. So I think the winner here can play top 4. Yes, they can. Wow, the Giants are actually in the top 4 on the live ladder as we're currently looking at it. And Hawthorn, with a big enough win, could jump, I think, as high as 3rd. But let's talk about the game specifically. So Brisbane, really good against Fremantle with a number of best 22 players out. I mean, I think their depth is so good that they can cope with that to some extent. They've proven that. But a really good win away from home. And of course, every game at this point is like a little bit of a final because it will dictate where everyone ends up, and that's true for both sides. So we can kind of assume that the Lions will probably be in some degree of form for this game, but I think that's also true for the Hawks, who, look, they were far too good for Melbourne. We expected that. They pumped Collingwood. They really challenged Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval as well the week before that, and I think this last little body of form for Hawthorn has raised them in my estimations, personally. And I think there might be an upset in this game. I haven't thrown any upsets out there this week. And I think logically we should expect Brisbane to win at the Gabba. But Hawthorn have a pretty good record against the Lions, albeit they don't play at the Gabba that often. There's been a few games here and there, but I think a lot of them have been in Tassie or the MCG. There might be a Marvel game in there as well. For whatever reason, it hasn't been fixtured at the Gabba that much over the last 6 years or something. So not a whole lot of form to go off there. I think we might just see a final round upset here that sort of, changes everything, or at least it will change everything for a week, and then the final start in Brisbane come good again. But I'm going to tip Hawthorn here. Don't listen to me. My tipping is terrible. But I have a feeling, and who cares? My tipping sucks anyway. I'm going to chase that feeling. Hawthorn win this game by 13 points to disrupt everyone's predictions. And then finally, we have the Gold Coast Suns and Essendon. So again, not too much to preview here. And then Gold Coast will have played a game in between this game and their last game. So nothing to read into as far as form goes. We know where Essendon's at. And Gold Coast simply need to win if they win, they can make the top 4. But they need to win by a certain amount. Look at that. So they need to make up 0.5%. I'm not going to do the math before I pick the margin to see what that is. But I think we can assume there's a good chance Essendon don't get that close to Gold Coast. They have been brave in recent weeks, and I absolutely wouldn't write them off of getting closer than people expect. But the recipe is there for a one-sided win. And if Gold Coast lose, they're still in the finals, but a big enough win gets them top 4, and it might even get them third. What do I think? Before trying to work it out, what do I think Gold Coast? Would it really be closer than 5 goals? I'm probably not going to tip that. I'll say 36 points. I don't really think about margin too heavily in these, but now it's really important for this. So we'll go at, okay, I hit 36 and the ladder didn't change. And I was like, what's going on? I tipped Essendon, my bad. Let's say Gold Coast by 36 points. They go to 4th. So they will be 0.2% behind Collingwood. Let's just change that and see if Gold Coast won by 50. Does that change it? It does. It puts them 3rd. Does it really matter? I mean, it's just the difference between a trip to Adelaide and a trip to the MCG to play Geelong, and neither of those are particularly tantalising. But either way, the Gold Coast Suns make the 4. Collingwood are in the 4. They're 1% ahead of Hawthorn as well. So margins do come into this quite a bit. The Giants will finish 6th. The Lions in 7th. They absolutely can still do damage from 7th. And equally, the Bulldogs are going to be a bit of a wild card too. So it's a pretty strong and even top 8, to be honest. I think the gap between 1st and 8th is relatively narrow this year compared to previous seasons, with Fremantle just missing out, and that could be the other way around if Fremantle win this game, obviously. So that will do for round 24, just the tips. Make sure you're there this weekend for the Bulldogs and Fremantle live stream. Watch along with myself and Dylan. Drizzy will be at the game. Looking forward to covering it all with you. For now, I thank you for watching. Thank you for being subscribed. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.